My name is Luana Ferreira. I was born in New York, in Washington Heights, and I grew up partly in the Dominican Republic, so culturally I identify very much as Dominican, whether I'm in the United States, New York, or in the Dominican Republic. However, my lifestyle is that of a New Yorker. So that makes me Dominican American, although I don't necessarily identify as such. I say I'm Dominican, even when I'm in the United States. My parents are Dominican, culturally I'm Dominican. So nonetheless, I feel very much as a New Yorker. I have a doctorate in Hispanic Linguistics, and I specialize in the variation of the Spanish language in all of its splendor spheres, but mostly lexicon, but also Spanish in the US. That's it. That's it. I am bilingual. However, bilingual or being bilingual is a very broad term as defined by linguists, society. To say that I am bilingual in the sense of being a native speaker, but also biliterate in both languages, yes, that is true. I am bilingual in English and Spanish. However, as I stated before, bilingualism can be a very broad term. There are people that are casually bilingual in the sense of their personal, what they call BICS, their basic interpersonal communication skills, for example. Some people consider themselves bilingual in that sense, in that if they can communicate in their enclaves, right? If they're efficient communicators, then that constitutes a type of bilingualism. So for me, yes, I am considered bilingual, not just by my own standard, but also by the social standard of what constitutes being a bilingual person. But to clarify, bilingualism can be a very broad term. So Spanish within the context of the United States. First of all, there are 41 million Spanish speakers in the United States, which is a very large number. However, there is a paradoxical relationship between the speakers of the Spanish language in the US and policy to teach that Spanish language, which does not exist in the United States. Excuse me. In Europe, we have programs that foster bilingualism, whether it's bilingualism in English, in French, in Italian. This is why many people from Europe, many Europeans speak more than two languages, more than one language. United States has been constructed as a monolingual country. So we have no official language, but we also don't have programs that foster true bilingualism. We have bilingual education programs that serve as transitional programs for children, Spanish-speaking children in this case, but then once they master the English language, they get transferred out into monolingual programs. So when we speak about bilingualism within the context of the United States does not promote bilingualism as other countries, even when we are or we live in very bilingual societies. However, when it comes to education, that does not exist. We take the proverbial Spanish 101, 102 in college to fulfill this language requirement, but it never transcends into true bilingualism unless you major in that language at the collegiate level. The words happen or come to fruition when there are reference. So the minute that somebody invents a rug, you name it, it comes about vocabulary or word inventories come about when new ENTS, when new reference emerge. So as things get created, as things get birthed, as concepts come to fruition, you got to name that. They have to be named. Sometimes they're named top to bottom, but most of the time they come from the bottom up. Like even when the colonizers came to the Caribbean, when they first came to the Caribbean, they try to define things that are indigenous to the Caribbean using their European vocabulary, right? It failed. This is when the triumph of canoa happens in El Diccionario de Nebrija in 1495, because the Spanish said, we don't know how to name this, so we're going to take the words from the indigenous people to name their things. And thus canoa appears as the first indigenismo in El Diccionario de Nebrija, 1495. I cannot speak as a linguist because linguists are supposed to observe language, not prescribe it. However, within my Latina identity and within the construct of how languages emerge and diffuse and propagate, when it comes to the word Latinx, as a Dominican native speaker, fluent native speaker, incidentally, Dominicans get told that we speak the worst Spanish of Latin America, but that's a different story. Latinx is just this thing that came about and developed in elite circles. And it's artificial. It doesn't come from the people. It's not a bottom-up approach. It's simply something that was constructed in elite collegiate circles, and now it's something that's being imposed onto speakers. So we can look at Latinx from an internal, what we call the internal machinery of language. Does it make sense for the Spanish language? No. So I guess the better question is, who is Latinx for? Because it's certainly not for Spanish speakers. So when I say that Latinx is an imperial imposition, are we not trying to anglicize the Spanish language by creating a new word that doesn't even follow the structure of the Spanish language? Isn't that a form of imperialization? And why is it about Spanish? Why aren't people going after Italian, Portuguese? I understand that Italian has, when it comes to the plural, but it's still gendered. So I think that the reason why people are coming after Latinx is because the Spanish language is gaining traction and it's becoming a global entity. You cannot speak about translation without including the Spanish language. I believe it's the second most spoken language after Mandarin. So I think that as we're gaining power, there's always a vocal, invested group trying to dismantle that power. And I'm not saying that, of course, Spanish is a language of the colonizers. That I am fully aware. But that is the structure of the language. And if we're going to approach the argument that Spanish is also an imperial language, then how is it that trying to redefine that language that identifies so many of us within the lens of English, how is that not a second imposition, an imperial imposition? So it wouldn't bother me if the same proponents of Latinx weren't those very same people that speak about decolonizing curricula, decolonize this, decolonize that, but they reject the notion that Latinx is a recolonization of our language. So where do we go from here? So a number of polls have indicated that less than 10% of Latinos favor the word Latinx. And I think it goes back to what I explained earlier. language changes happen naturally. This is something that was fabricated and it's being imposed. And if anybody dares to present a plausible argument like the one that I'm proposing from my own identity and from a Spanish speaker, there's this Orwellian sense of an accusation that you're this, you're this, you're this. I don't need to accept this. And I'm not going to be excommunicated from my own discussion. This is a discussion that belongs to Latinos, whether they're Spanish speaking or not, but mostly if they're Spanish speakers, because this directly affects the Spanish language, the language that I majored in because I wasn't good at anything else in college. So now I'm being told that my language that I majored in my entire life, that I've spoken my entire life, I'm speaking it incorrectly by a group of people who have no understanding of how the Spanish language functions. Because most people that use the word Latinx are not even Latino. They're not even Latino. So now I have non-Latinos telling me how to speak my language. That's not happening. So what needs to happen? How do we move forward? Let's continue having a discussion about this among Latinos first. Let's be open. Let's not make these accusations that just because you are anti-Latinx, you have to be any kind of phobia, insert phobia here. We need to also raise our voices. Those of us that are against it, we need to raise our voices and provide I think my argument is plausible because it's not even Latinx. It's that Latinx has overtaken Latina, Latino, etc. So I wouldn't even be opposed to Latinx, but you have to be inclusive of also Latina, Latino. Latinx does not define me, and it certainly does not define the 96% that are against it.